The door shut behind her, and the warmth of the only home she had ever known shut with it. Snow swallowed her first step, then the second. Barren Vale did not look back. They had called her empty, broken, a mate who could not give the pack its future. 5 winters of whispers had hardened into a single verdict, and the one who once swore her the moon itself had signed it without ever meeting her eyes. Now the wild had her. The cold bit through her cloak like teeth. Ahead, the mountains rose in a wall of white. Endless, indifferent, the kind of place that sent strong wolves to die. She should have wept. She had no tears left. But there was something they could not see, something the warm hall had cast out without ever knowing it held. A flutter beneath her ribs. Faint, fragile, impossible. 2 heartbeats that were not her own. The pack had thrown away the very thing it was dying to protect. And the woman they branded worthless was about to become the most dangerous secret these mountains had ever kept. She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach and walked into the storm. The frost came early that year. It crept up the tall windows of the hold at Ashmore, tracing thin white veins across the glass, and it did not melt even when the great fires roared below. Barren Vale stood at the window of a chamber that no longer felt like hers. Her fingertips rested against the cold pane. Outside, the world was going white. Inside, something colder was already taking root. 5 winters. That was how long it had been since the night the 2 packs had stood together and watched her bind her life to his. 5 winters since the howling had turned to celebration, since the old wounds between bloodlines had closed, since he had pressed his brow to hers and sworn she was the only future he would ever need. She had believed him. She had believed all of it. Now the whispers lived in the walls. Empty, they said. Barren. A mate who cannot carry a single pup. In the first year, the words had been soft, almost pitying. By the 3rd, they had grown teeth. And now, in the 5th, they were weapons, sharpened and aimed by people who smiled at her in the courtyard and counted the days until she was gone. She heard the heavy door open behind her. She did not need to turn. His scent reached her first. Pine after rain, and beneath it, something colder, like steel left out in the snow. Once, that scent had made her chest go warm and loose. Once, it had meant safety. Now it only made the ache in her ribs pull tight. "You were not at the gathering tonight," Alaric said. His voice was low, careful, the kind of careful a man used when he had already decided something and was only waiting to say it. Barren turned at last. She kept her chin high, the way her mother had taught her, even as everything inside her was quietly coming apart. "I had no wish," she said, "to sit at a table where your counsel speaks openly of who should replace me." Her eyes did not waver. "Nor to watch Cordelia Crane fill your cup and lean into your shoulder as if the seat beside you were already hers." Something flickered in his jaw, a muscle working beneath the skin. "Cordelia is a guest," he said. "You see threats where there are only manners." "Do I?" She crossed the room, slowly. The fur lining of her robe whispered against the stone floor. "The healer came to me this morning," she said. "He did not bring herbs. He did not bring hope." Her breath caught, just slightly, before she steadied it. "He brought a draft to calm my nerves, because the decision has already been made, and you have already approved it." The silence between them was a living thing. It filled the room. It pressed on her lungs. Alaric looked away, toward the fire that did nothing to warm any of it. And there, in the place where their bond should have pulsed warm and golden between them, Barren felt only a wall. Cold, smooth, deliberate. He was shielding himself from her. He was hiding. What Alaric did not say, what he would never say aloud, was that he could feel her on the other side of that wall. He could feel the grief coming off her like heat off stone, and it was unbearable. The bond between them had been the truest thing he had ever known. The moon herself had tied it, soul to soul, the night they mated. To press against it now, to feel her sorrow and her fear and the slow shattering of her trust, was a punishment he could barely stand. So he built the wall higher. He told himself it was mercy. He told himself a leader did not have the luxury of his own heart. The borders were failing. The lesser packs were testing him, scenting weakness in a line with no heir. Whispers had become threats, and threats became blades waiting in the dark. A pack without a future eats itself. That was what the old one said. He had repeated it to himself so many times that the words had gone smooth and meaningless, like a stone worn down in a river. Still, when he looked at her, he saw the girl who had laughed in the rain. He saw the woman who had held his face in her hands and told him he was more than the weight he carried. He saw everything he was about to throw away, and he did it anyway. "The council has invoked the old law," he said. His voice came out hollow, rehearsed. "A mate who cannot bear a pup within 5 winters may be set aside for the good of the pack." Barren felt the breath leave her body. "Set aside," she repeated. The word did not seem real. "You cannot set me aside, Alaric. We are fated. The moon tied us. If you tear that, it tears us both." "I am not severing the bond." His jaw tightened. "But I must take another. I must take Cordelia, and for the pack to accept her." He stopped. He made himself finish. "You cannot remain inside our borders." The room seemed to tilt. Exile. Not a parting. Not a quiet life somewhere far away. For a wolf, to be torn from the pack and the land that fed it was a wound that did not close. It broke the mind. It hollowed the body. It was a death that simply took its time. "Winter is here," she whispered. Her amber eyes went wide. "The high country is already buried. You are not sending me away, Alaric. You are sending me to die." He would not look at her. "You are strong," he said. "You will survive. You may find shelter beyond the ridge. You may cross into other lands. Look at me." Her voice cracked the air like a branch under ice. "Look at me." Slowly, as if it cost him something to move at all, the leader of Ashmore lifted his silver eyes to hers, and for one breath, one single fragile breath, she saw him, the boy who had promised her the stars. Then it was gone, buried under the cold weight he had chosen to carry. "By dawn," he said, "you will be gone by dawn. The decree is already signed." He turned. He walked out. The great door closed behind him with a sound like a verdict, and Barren sank to her knees on the cold stone, one hand pressed to her chest, where the bond she could not break still throbbed like a wound that refused to close. She did not scream. She had no scream left in her. She only knelt there in the freezing dark while the frost climbed higher on the glass. Dawn came gray and pitiless. They had taken her fine things, the velvets, the furs. She stood in the courtyard in plain wool and heavy boots, a small leather satchel in her hands, and she did not let them see her tremble. On the high balcony stood Ambrose Crane, that careful, smiling man, with his daughter beside him. Cordelia was already wrapped in a cloak that had once been Marin's. Alaric was nowhere to be seen. He could not even stand to watch. Garrick, the captain who had once sworn his life to her protection, read the decree in a voice that wavered at the edges. Titles: stripped, standing, gone, return, forbidden on pain of death. Marin did not weep. She had spent every tear the night before. She took the satchel. She turned her back on the only home she had ever known. And as she reached the line where the cleared ground gave way to the dark wall of pines, she stopped. Just once. She looked back at the high stone walls of Ashmore, gold in the cold morning light, beautiful and cruel, and already closing behind her like a mouth. Then she pressed one hand, quietly, to her stomach, to the secret no one in that hall would ever guess she carried, and she walked into the white. They made her walk. That was the part the pack would remember, not the decree, not the law of the old wolves. The image that would live in every whispered telling for winters to come was this: a former lady of the hold, on foot, in the snow, while 6 armed riders ringed her like she was something that might turn and bite. Marin Vale understood exactly what that image was meant to do. It was a lesson. It was meant to be seen. Every wolf who watched her go would carry the same quiet message home and tuck it under their ribs. That worth was a thing you earned and could lose. That a mate who did not produce could be erased. That even the one who had stood at the leader's side could be reduced, in a single morning, to a prisoner walking into the white. So she gave them nothing to remember but her spine. She kept it straight. She kept her chin level with the iron sky. And she walked. The cold was a living thing. It came up through the soles of her boots and settled into the small bones of her feet. It crept under the good wool at her collar and pressed cold knuckles against the back of her neck. By the end of the first day, her toes had gone numb, and by the second, the blisters on her heels had broken, and still she did not ask the riders to slow. They would not have slowed. She knew the men by name. She had passed them in corridors. She had nodded to their mates at the long tables. Now they rode in silence with their eyes fixed forward, and only the youngest of them, a lean boy with frost in his lashes, ever let his gaze slip sideways to her with something like shame in it. That shame was the only kindness on the whole journey. She held on to it. At night they built their fire just far enough that the warmth died before it reached her. She curled against the roots of a tree, wrapped in her thin cloak, and listened to them murmur over their food while her own belly ached with emptiness. She did not weep. She had spent her tears on the floor of a chamber that was no longer hers. The night the great door closed. There were none left now. There was only the cold, and the walking, and the long, slow burn of something hardening inside her that she did not yet have a name for. It was the wind that brought him back to her. On the second night, it shifted, and it carried down from the high slopes a scent that her body recognized before her mind could raise its guard. Pine. Pine after rain. And under it, something colder, like clean steel. His scent, and just like that, Against her will, the cold valley dissolved, and she was somewhere green and warm and full of light. Before the leadership had hardened him, before the council had wrapped its careful hands around his throat, before the whispers, there had been a summer. There had been water under a low and heavy moon, and a forest holding its breath, and a young wolf who had found her at the edge of the dark and looked at her like she was the only thing the moon had ever bothered to finish. The bond had not yet formed between them, but it had been there, humming under the skin, a pull with no name, a tension that made the air feel thick. She remembered how he had stood a careful distance away, as if he did not trust himself to come closer. "You make it difficult to think," he had said, low, almost angry at his own voice. And she had laughed, soft, because she felt the same dizzy unraveling and had no idea what to do with it either. When at last his hand found hers, the bond had snapped into place like a struck string. She had gasped. He had gone utterly still. And then the whole world had narrowed to the heat of his palm against hers and the slow, careful way he drew her in, learning her, in no hurry at all. That was what undid her now, remembering it. The slowness. He had not grabbed. He had not taken. He had simply stayed, his brow against hers, his thumb moving in slow circles over her knuckles, his breath stirring the hair at her temple, while the bond bloomed warm and golden between their two souls. She had pressed her face into the curve of his throat and breathed him in until she was dizzy with it. "I will never let the world be cold to you," he had murmured against her hair. "Not while I breathe." She had believed him with everything she had. Now the same scent rode the same wind down the same cruel slopes, and it cut her open from the inside. Barren stumbled in the snow. One hand flew to her chest, where the bond still lived, frayed and raw, pulsing with every beat of her heart. He had not severed it. That was the wickedest thing of all. He had left the thread between their souls intact, so that even now, even out here, she could feel the hollow shape of him on the far end. A phantom warmth where his presence used to live. An ache with no cure and no end. She pressed her palm hard against her sternum, as if she could hold the broken pieces of it together by force of will alone. And she kept walking. The wind did not care. It carried his scent a little longer, and then it shifted again and took him away. Far to the south, in a hall blazing with firelight and false warmth, the leader of Ashmore sat at a feast he could not taste. The wine was sweet on Alaric Thorne's tongue. It might as well have been ash. All around him the council murmured their approval. Cups were raised. Voices spoke of bright years to come, of strong blood, of the future a young and fertile mate would surely bring. Cordelia Crane sat at his side in a cloak that still carried another woman's scent, her hand resting too lightly, too deliberately, near his own. Alaric heard almost none of it, because somewhere far beyond the walls, moving farther with every breath, the other half of his soul was bleeding into the cold. He had told himself the bond would dull once she was gone. He had been a fool. It had not dulled. It had sharpened. Every step she took away from him drew the thread thinner and tighter until it sang with a high, constant pain that no amount of wine could drown. He could feel her exhaustion, the slow cold, working into her body, and under it, faint but unmistakable, a fury that frightened him. Let her hate me, some buried part of him thought. Hate would keep her warm. Hate would keep her walking. Hate, at least, was a kind of fire. "You are far away tonight," Cordelia said softly. Her scent reached him. Sweet, floral, pleasant in the way a cut flower is pleasant before it begins to brown at the edges. It was wrong. It would always be wrong, because the moon had already made its choice years ago, on a summer night by the water, and no law that men had written could unmake what the moon had done. "I am tired," Alaric said. He did not look at her. Ambrose Crane leaned in then, his voice oiled and low, pitched only for the high table. "You did what a leader must," the older wolf said. "The heart is a luxury you cannot afford. The packs were whispering. The borders are thin. You have bought us time. And time, my friend, is everything." Alaric stared into the fire. He thought of amber eyes going wide in the dark. He thought of a small leather satchel, far too light for a winter that long. He thought of the way she had said, "Look at me," and of how he had forced himself to do it, and of how it had felt like swallowing broken glass. "Time," he repeated. The word was empty in his mouth. He rose without another word and walked out into the cold corridor where no one could see his hands begin to shake. The bond pulsed once, hard against his ribs. She was weeping. He could feel it, all those frozen miles away, and there was nothing in all his power as the leader of Ashmore that he could do to stop her tears. He pressed his fist against the cold stone and bowed his head. For the good of the pack, he told himself again. It no longer sounded like a reason. It sounded like an excuse. The journey took 3 days. On the third afternoon, the world changed. The forest thinned, and then it simply ended, and before her rose the high country. A wall of jagged peaks crowned in heavy cloud, white and silent and absolute. It was the line where the cleared lands gave way to the true wild, the place where a wolf went only when there was nowhere left to send her. The riders drew up their horses, the captain dismounted. Garrick was a broad man, his beard caked with frost, and there had been a day in a courtyard full of summer light, when he had knelt and sworn his blade to her safety. He could not look at her now. "This is as far as the decree allows, my lady," he said. The title slipped out before he could stop it. He winced at his own mouth. He looked instead at the peaks, at the bruised iron sky, swollen with the storm that was coming. "There may be shelter past the ridge," he said quietly. "Old dens, forgotten places. You are stronger than any of them ever gave you credit for." His jaw worked. He swallowed. "I am sorry it has come to this. I would have." He stopped because there was nothing he could finish that would not be a lie. "May the moon light your way." Maren looked at him for a long moment. The wind tugged at her cloak. The first fine snow of the coming storm began to fall, dusting his shoulders, settling in the frost of his beard. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady and stripped of everything soft. "Carry a message for me," she said. Garrick lifted his head. "Tell your leader," Maren said, "that the moon sees everything, and she is slow to forgive." She did not wait for his answer. She turned her back on the men and the horses and the warm lands lying behind them, and she walked toward the wall of white. She heard him mount. She heard the slow retreat of hooves through deepening snow, fainter and fainter, until there was nothing left but wind. And then she was alone, truly alone, for the first time in all her life. The cold pressed in from every direction. The storm thickened overhead. The peaks loomed, vast and uncaring, more than ready to swallow one small woman whole. Barren stopped at the very edge of the tree line. She stood there, a dark figure against all that white, and she felt the broken bond throb once more in her chest, that phantom warmth that refused to die no matter how far she walked. She did not curse his name. She did not fall to her knees. She simply pressed one hand to the flat of her stomach over the secret that slept warm and hidden beneath her ribs, the secret not one soul in that distant hall would ever guess she carried. And she made a quiet vow to the rising wind. "They threw us both away," she whispered. The snow swirled around her like falling ash. "But the cold did not make me, and the cold is not going to unmake me." Her amber eyes rose to the merciless peaks. "We are going to live, all of us." And with that, the woman they had branded empty, the woman they had called worthless and cast out to die, lifted her chin, gathered the last of her strength into her thin and aching body, and stepped into the heart of the storm. She did not look back. Behind her was a door that had already closed for good. Ahead was a storm and a secret, and whatever the two of them could still become. So she chose the storm. The wild did not welcome her. It simply opened, vast and white and indifferent, and let her walk in. There were no borders out here, no banners, no counsel to please, and no whispers to fear. There was only the cold, and the snow, and the silence so deep it seemed to press against her ears. Barren had spent her whole life inside the careful walls of the pack. Now the walls were gone, and the first thing the wilderness taught her was that the woman who had walked out of that courtyard could not survive it. So she let that woman go. The storm came for her on the second night. It did not arrive as falling snow. It arrived as a wall, a roaring white force that erased the world from one breath to the next. The cold dropped past anything she had ever known behind warm stone. It reached into her chest and closed a fist around her lungs. Her fingers stopped obeying her. Her lips split. The good wool that had seemed so warm in the courtyard became, out here, almost nothing at all. She understood then that she had a choice: stay as she was and die before morning, or call the change and let the wolf carry her where the woman could not go. She knelt in the snow, and she called it. Without a pack, the change is not a gift. It is an agony. There was no warm circle of kin to lend their strength, no low hum of pack magic to ease the breaking and soften the cost. There was only Barren, alone in the screaming dark, while her bones cracked and lengthened and reset themselves, while her skin tore and knit and pushed out thick fur, while a sound that was half scream and half howl ripped from her throat, and the storm swallowed it whole. It hurt more than the courtyard, more than the decree, more, almost, than the cold wall he had built between their souls. But when it was finished, she stood on 4 legs in the snow, her coat the deep red of dying autumn leaves, and the storm could no longer kill her quite so easily. The wolf knew things the woman had forgotten. It knew to turn its back to the wind. It knew to dig down beneath the roots of an old fallen tree and curl into a tight, warm knot. It knew how to listen to the dark, how to scent danger on the air, how to wait without despairing. So Barren became the wolf, and the wolf, for now, survived. Hunger was the constant. That was the thing no one ever told you about the deep cold. It was not the wind that wore you down in the end. It was the hollow. The high country in the heart of winter is a starving place. The game grows thin and wary. The snow hides what little there is and gives nothing back. She hunted from the first gray light until the last. She chased lean white hares across frozen meadows and lost most of them in the drifts. She dug through ice for roots that tasted of bark and old dirt. She cracked the shells of frozen streams to snatch at slow fish in the shrinking pools beneath. Some days she ate. Most days she did not. And every night, curled beneath the roots, with her nose tucked under her tail, the bond throbbed in her chest like a wound that would not close. That was the cruelty that followed her into the dark. Even here, even half wild with hunger, she could still feel the frayed thread of him stretching all the way back to the warm halls she had left behind. A phantom warmth on the far end. An ache shaped exactly like the space he used to fill. Sometimes, in the gray hour before dawn, she swore she could feel him feeling her. She told herself she only imagined it. She told herself a great many things out there in the dark, just to keep her mind from cracking the way the cold cracked everything else. Her coat grew dull and matted. Her ribs began to push against her hide. The proud russet beast that had walked into the storm was thinning, week by week, into something gaunt and hollow-eyed and grimly stubborn. She was beginning to die. She knew it the way an animal knows it, quietly, without drama. There came a night, near the end of the worst of it, when she lay in the lee of a great rock and did not get up for a long time. The cold had stopped hurting, which is the most dangerous thing the cold can do. A soft gray peace had begun to settle over her, whispering that she could simply close her eyes and rest and let the snow take her. And there would be no more whispers and no more aching and no more walking ever again. It would have been so easy. She closed her eyes, and something deep inside her refused. It began with the sickness. She had sheltered in a shallow cave above a frozen river, and she had eaten, for once, a full meal. Fish pulled from a pocket of open water. She should have felt the strength of it spread through her. Instead, her stomach turned over. She brought it all back up into the snow. She thought it was the cold. Some slow poison of the wilderness creeping up from the frozen ground. But the next morning, it came again, sharp and sudden, the instant she stirred, and the morning after that. Always the mornings. Then there was her scent. A wolf knows its own body better than any healer ever could. And Barren, lying still in the dark of the cave, began to notice that her own scent was changing. The sharp, lonely tang of a dying rogue was softening, and underneath it had risen something else, something warm, sweet, like milk, and the faint, remembered smell of summer flowers in bloom. She went very still. She drew the change back through her, there in the cold cave, and stood once more as a woman wrapped in the ragged ruin of her cloak. Her hands trembled as she pressed them flat against her stomach. "No," she whispered into the empty dark. Her breath bloomed white in front of her face. "No, it cannot be." 5 winters of waiting, of healers and their useless herbs in their pitying eyes, of whispers that grew teeth, of being told again and again that her body was a barren field, a broken thing, a wife who could give the pack nothing at all. And now, here, half-starved, freezing, cast out to die in the snow, with no warm hands and no healer and no hope. Now. She closed her eyes. She sent her awareness down into herself, the way the old ones had taught her long ago. Past the burning of her frost-bitten toes, past the hollow gnawing of her belly, down into the deep and secret center of her. And there she felt it, a spark, faint, steady, alive, a small flickering heartbeat that was not her own. A sob caught in her throat. Her eyes flew open and filled. Her hands pressed harder, as if she could cup the impossible thing and keep it safe by touch alone. A child. After everything. After being branded empty and worthless and thrown away to rot in the cold, her body had made a child. She almost laughed, but the moon was not finished with her. Because as she knelt there, breath ragged, her awareness still turned inward, she became aware of something she had missed. Not one spark. She held very still. She focused, deeper, harder, hardly daring to breathe. And there it was, right beside the first, a second tiny heartbeat, stubborn and fragile, drumming away in the dark alongside its sibling. 2, not 1, 2. The sob broke out of her then, half weeping and half wild laughter, a sound so raw it startled the silence of the cave and sent it ringing off the stone. It was a cruel and beautiful joke. He had cast her out to secure his bloodline, and in doing so, he had thrown that very bloodline into the snow to freeze. The leader of the pack had banished his own heirs, and he would never know. Something shifted in Barren. There in the dark of that cave, the soft gray peace that had been pulling her toward the snow let go of her completely. In its place rose something with teeth. She knelt there with both hands pressed to her stomach, and she felt a fire kindle behind her ribs that the cold could not touch. It was not hope. Hope was too thin and trembling a word for what moved in her now. It was fury, refined down into pure purpose. She was not a discarded mate. She was not a barren field, a broken sword, a problem the council had solved over wine. She was the only thing standing between two small lives and a world that wanted them dead. And that changed everything. "Listen to me," she whispered to the two heartbeats. Her voice shook. Her eyes glowed feral in the dark. "I do not care what they called me. I do not care what they decided. You are mine. And no winter, and no leader, and no council in any hall will ever take you from me." Then her thoughts turned, slowly, to a colder fear. To what it would mean if they ever learned the truth. If word ever reached those warm stone halls that the empty mate had not been empty at all, that she had carried and survived and brought into the world the true heirs of the line, they would come. She saw it as clearly as if it had already happened. Ambrose Crane, with his oiled voice and his careful hands, the council, with its old laws and its endless appetite for control. They would not let two living heirs run free in the high country, beyond their reach. They would hunt the children down through every pass and valley. They would tear them from her arms and carry them back to that poisoned hall, and they would raise them into tools, into weapons, into pieces, on a board they alone were allowed to move. And her. They would not let the mother live. A barren wife, exiled and forgotten, was a closed door. But a mother with living proof of their cruelty walking at her side, was a threat that had to be erased. "They will never know," Barren vowed. Her voice had stopped shaking. It had gone hard and cold and certain as the stone beneath her knees. "I will raise you in the shadows. I will teach you the cold, and the hunt, and the truth. You will grow stronger than any of them ever dreamed a wolf could be, and no one will ever decide your worth for you the way they tried to decide mine." She rose, gaunt, ragged, burning from within. She turned her face toward the deeper peaks, and she walked. She was not walking away from a home anymore. She was walking toward one she would build with her own teeth and will. Far to the south, behind warm stone walls, Alaric Thorn came awake with a sharp breath and sat up in the dark. His hand was already pressed to his chest. Something had changed. For weeks, the bond had been a single note of pain, thin and high and unbroken. The steady song of her grief and her exhaustion stretched across all those frozen miles. He had learned to live inside that note. A man learns to live with a stone in his boot because he knows he put it there. But tonight, the song had shifted. The grief was still there. The cold was still there. Underneath them, though, something new had risen. A fierceness, a heat, a will so sudden and so absolute that it had reached across all that distance and dragged him bodily out of sleep. He did not understand it. He pressed his palm harder to his sternum and tried to read the bond the way he had read it so easily in the early years, when her every mood had been an open book laid against his own heart. She was alive. That much, against all the odds of that storm, he could still feel. And the feeling brought a relief so sharp it frightened him. But there was more now. Something at the very edge of his senses. Something layered and strange. A warmth he could not name and could not reach. Like a sound carried on a wind blowing the wrong way. He told himself it was guilt. His own guilt, wearing some new face. He rose and crossed to the window and stood looking out at the distant peaks, white and terrible beneath a hard winter moon. She was out there. Somewhere in all that white, the one soul the moon had ever tied to his was fighting for her life because of a name he had signed with his own hand. For the good of the pack, he had told himself. He had told himself so many times the words had worn smooth as a river stone. Now, standing alone in the cold dark, feeling that strange new heat burn on the far end of a bond he never should have broken, the leader of the pack felt the first true crack run straight through the wall he had built. He did not know what she was becoming out there in the wild. He did not know what she carried. He knew only, with a certainty that turned his stomach, that he had thrown away something he would spend the rest of his life failing to understand. He stood at the window until dawn. The peaks gave him nothing. They never would. It took her many days to find it. She found it the way the wolf finds everything, by following a thing that did not belong. The faint old scent of worked stone, drifting down a hidden valley on a turn of the wind. She followed it through a narrow pass walled on every side by tall cliffs of dark slate, into a fold of land so sheltered and so far from any trail that no patrol would ever stumble across it. And there, half swallowed by the mountainside, she found the ruins. Once, long ago, it had been a place of high stone arches and careful walls, raised by hands long since turned to dust. Now the roof had fallen in. Vines and moss had climbed and consumed the stone. Snow drifted through the broken windows and lay in soft, pale mounds across the cracked floor. It was forgotten. It was hidden. And the moment her gaunt wolf eyes took it in, she knew it was exactly what she needed. A great shaggy bear had claimed the deepest chamber for its long winter sleep. For a moment, Marin only stood in the broken doorway and looked at the sleeping mountain of fur and muscle. Then she bared her teeth. She let the fury rise, all of it. Every drop the council had earned and the cold had sharpened, and she drove the beast out into the snow with a ferocity that startled them both. This place was hers now. She walked its broken halls slowly, the woman again, the ragged cloak pulled tight around her thinning shoulders, one hand resting always on the new and fragile curve of her belly. She found a deep chamber, low and close, the kind of space that would hold a little warmth against the dark. She knelt in the center of it. She pressed both hands to her stomach and felt, faint and steady and stubborn, the two small heartbeats drumming on. "Here," she whispered. Her voice echoed softly off the old stone walls. "We will build it here, the two of you, and me. This is where you will be born, and this is where you will be safe, and this is where you will grow strong enough that no one can ever throw you away." Outside, the wind howled across the broken arches, and the cold pressed in from every direction, hungry and endless. But inside, in the deep stone chamber, the exiled mother knelt with her arms wrapped around the secret no soul in any hall would ever guess she carried. And for the first time since the great door had closed behind her, Marin Vale was not afraid. She had stopped running from her fate. She had begun, instead, to build it. There is a kind of cold that the body can fight, and there is a kind of fire that it cannot. Marin had survived the first. She had walked into the storm and learned the wolf and clawed a home out of fallen stone. She had thought, in her pride, that she had survived the worst the world could do to her. She was wrong, because as the two small lives inside her grew, something woke that she had no defense against at all. The bond began to burn. For the first long while, the thread between her soul and his had only ached, a frayed and phantom warmth throbbing softly when she was weakest, easy enough to press a hand against and endure. But the children carried his blood. The silver of his line ran in their small, fragile veins, and as that blood gathered strength, something in it reached across all the frozen leagues, reached toward the other half of where it had come from. And the bond, fed now, came alive. It no longer ached, it pulled. Some nights it grew so hot in her chest that Marin woke with a gasp, her hand already pressed to her sternum, her whole body leaning toward the dark as if he were lying just beyond the reach of her fingers. He never was. He was leagues to the south, behind warm stone, with another woman draped in furs that had once been hers. She told herself that, fiercely, in the worst of those nights. It did not help, because the bond did not care what her mind knew. The bond only knew what the moon had made, and the moon had not unmade it. She would lie awake in the deep chamber, the fire banked low, both hands cradling the heavy weight of her belly, and she would feel his warmth pulse on the far end of the thread, steady and unwanted, and she would despise the way her own traitor heart still tilted toward it, like a flower toward a light it had no business loving. "You chose," she would whisper into the dark, to him, to herself, to the silence. "Whatever the blood remembers, you chose." But longing, she was learning, does not answer to reason. Grief she had made her peace with. This was something harder. The same fire was burning the other way. Far to the south, Alaric Thorne had stopped pretending he could sleep. The thread he had refused to sever had turned against him. Where once it had carried only the dull, steady weight of her grief, it now blazed with a heat that woke him in the deep hours and would not let him rest. It pulled him to his feet at the window. It dragged his eyes north, always north, toward the white peaks, as if his very soul were straining at a leash he could not see. His healers had no name for it. His council had begun to murmur that their leader was haunted, and Cordelia, the mate they had given him, had stopped asking long ago. She watched him cross to the window in the dead of night, one hand pressed to his chest, and her face held nothing soft at all. "You are still chained to her," she said to him once, flat and cold, in an empty hall. He was too tired to lie. "Yes," he answered. He did not know how he could feel her so clearly across so much distance. He only knew that the thread in his chest hummed with life that grew fiercer with every turning season, and that whatever waited at the far end of it was no longer the broken woman he had cast into the snow. She was becoming something. He could feel it. And it frightened him in a way the failing boarders and the bold rival packs never had. The night the children came, the moon hung swollen and low, and the deep red of an old wound. Barren had gone out at dusk to gather wood. The first pain found her there, beneath the broken arches, with an armful of branches, and the red light spilling across the snow. It folded her to her knees. The wood scattered. She knelt in the cold, both hands flying to the hard, tight swell of her, and the deep animal knowing of her body told her, with no doubt at all, that the hour had come. She did not let herself be afraid. She had braced for this through every long week, even as she dreaded it. She dragged herself back through the ruined halls to the deepest chamber, the one she had lined all season with soft moss and dry fern, and the cured hides of everything she had hunted. Her nest, the safest place that two hands and a fierce will had been able to build in all the world. And then the night dissolved into a long red roar of pain. For a wolf, birth is meant to belong to the pack, a mate to soothe, pack healers to lend their warmth and their steady hands, a circle of kin to hold the danger at the door. Barren had moss and old stone and a bleeding moon staring down through the fallen roof, and her own refusal to let her children die. The pain came in waves, each one crueler than the last. It tore through her spine and her belly and pulled cries out of her that rang off the ruined walls and chased the silence into hiding. She set her teeth into a strip of leather to keep from shattering them. Sweat ran off her in the freezing dark, and in her chest, through all of it, the bond was screaming, because at the very height of the crisis, with two lives fighting their way out of her, the thread between her soul and his flared hotter than it ever had in all those long months. She felt him, not the memory of him. Him. She felt his presence surge on the far end of the bond, wild and reaching and lost. as if the same red moon had dragged him awake leagues away, as if some part of him was straining north through the dark, without the first idea why. "No," she gasped around the leather, around the pain. "Not even like this. You do not get to be here, not even now." The bond did not listen. The bond only burned. And so, drenched in red moonlight and sweat and agony, in the deepest hour of the longest night, Barren Vale labored utterly alone, and not alone at all. Just past the dark heart of the night, the first child came. She caught the small, squirming form in her own shaking hands. Instinct did the work no midwife was there to do. She cleared the airway. She cleaned the newborn with frantic, trembling tenderness. And then a sharp, strong cry split the ancient chamber wide open. A sound sweeter than anything she had ever heard in any warm and golden hall. A boy. His hair was dark, raven dark, like her own. And when his small face screwed up and his eyes cracked open for a single instant against the red light, her breath simply stopped in her throat. Even in the dimness, the color could not be mistaken. Liquid silver. The mark of the very line that had thrown them out into the snow. She had no time to hold the wonder of it. The next wave broke over her, fiercer than all the rest, and she doubled forward, clutching her firstborn to her chest to shield his small body as her exhausted self bore down again. The second birth came faster. It was crueler too, her spent muscles trembling on the edge of failing her entirely. With a final cry that seemed to drag the last of her strength up out of the marrow of her bones, she brought her second child into the cold and waiting dark. Another boy. She sagged back against the hides, her chest heaving, the edges of her sight going soft and gray, and she gathered the very dregs of herself to clean and warm the second life. This one was not like the first. His hair was pale, silver fair, the color of his father in winter, and when he wailed, his cry came deeper and more demanding than his brother's. A small, furious thing, announcing itself to a world that had not asked for him and would have to make room anyway. He bore the silver eyes, too. Barren drew them both against her bare and shaking chest. She wrapped the ragged cloak around the three of them against the damp stone chill, and the two tiny things rooted blindly toward her warmth, their small hands fisting in her skin, finding what they needed. And then Barren Vale wept. Not the tears of grief she had thought were long spent. These were something else. Hot and fast and helpless, they fell from her face onto the small dark head and the small fair head, and she let them fall. She had done it. Against the cold. Against the hunger. Against the bond that had tried to drag a ghost into her birthing room. Against the decree of the wolf who had left her for dead in the snow. She had brought two whole, fierce, breathing lives into the world with her own two hands. "Rowan," she whispered, pressing her lips to the dark-haired one, the quiet one, already watching her with those calm, impossible eyes. She turned to the pale-haired boy, who had already shoved against his brother for the better place, certain of himself before he had drawn 100 breaths. "Angacious," she breathed. The red moon slid slowly toward the broken edge of the roof, and in the deep stone chamber, an exiled mother held the future of everything between her arms and rocked it and would not let it go. Leagues to the south, in the warm dark of the hold, Alaric Thorn woke with a cry torn out of a place he had not known was in him. He came up out of sleep, both hands clutched to his chest, soaked through with sweat as though he had run without stopping for days. Something had happened in the bond, something vast. For one long burning moment in the dead of the night, the thread in his chest had flared so hard, so completely, that he had felt his soul tip toward the north, as if it would tear loose of his body and fly there bodily through the dark. And then it had settled. Not snapped, not faded, settled. The way the whole world settles after a storm has finally broken. The air changed, charged, never quite the same again. He stood in the dark, shaking, and he understood none of it. He knew only that something had shifted in the deep foundations of the world, that something had come into being out there in the cold north, that one day would stand before everything he was and weigh it. He went to the window. The blood moon hung low and red and silent above the white peaks. He watched it pale into a thin gray dawn, one hand pressed to a chest that would never feel the same again. "What is out there?" he whispered to the north. "What did I throw away?" The north kept its silence, the way it always had. But a cold dread had taken root in him now, beside the old familiar guilt, and it would not be dug out. The first season of the twins was the hardest of Marin's life, and the most precious. There was no rest in it. The hunger never wholly let go. She moved through the short gray days half asleep, two small mouths always needing her, her body wrung dry to fill them. Her own strength came last, always last, and some days it did not come at all. And yet, there were moments in the hush before dawn, with both boys finally asleep and warm against her, and the fire ticking low, when Marin felt a peace she had never once tasted inside the warm walls of the hold. No eyes there to judge her. No voices counting the seasons of her body, or weighing her worth against what she could give. There was only the deep stone room and the two small lives that needed her, and the fierce, simple truth that to them she was not empty, was not broken, was not worthless. To them she was the whole world. She watched them begin to grow. Rowan, quiet and watchful. Those dark silver eyes already following everything, already turning it over. Cassius, loud and bold, and quick to fury, already straining to rise before his legs could hold him. Two halves of one fierce whole. Two heirs of a line that did not even know they drew breath. "You will never wonder whether you are wanted," she murmured to them, again and again, through the long dark watches. "You will never doubt what you are worth, not for a single day. Whatever else this cold world takes from the three of us, it will never take that. I swear it on the moon that made you." And far to the south, season by quiet season, the warm halls began to rot from the inside. The mate the council had chosen gave them nothing. The strong heirs they had sacrificed everything to secure did not come, and did not come. The borders thinned. The lesser packs grew bold and circled. And the leader they had once feared became a hollow thing who paced the corridors at night with one hand always at his chest, his eyes always turned north, searching the dark for a ghost who was no ghost at all. The bond had not broken. It had only been waiting. And out in the cold, in a forgotten place of fallen arches, the future of everything they had thrown away slept warm against its mother's heart, gathering its strength, growing, coming. A buck broke from the tree line, and 2 shadows took it down before it had run 10 strides. One came in low and silent from the left. The other hit it head on like a falling tree. By the time Barren reached the kill, both her sons stood over it, breathing hard, grinning at each other in the gray dawn light. They were not boys anymore. They had not been boys for a very long time. 18 winters carved the valley deeper. They carved the woman deeper too. The mother who had wept over 2 newborns in the red moonlight was gone now. The way the soft girl who walked into the storm had gone before her. In her place stood something the wilderness had forged and tempered and tested again and again until it would not break. Her dark hair was streaked through with silver now. Her amber eyes had gone sharp as a hunting blade. And the 2 small lives that had once fit against her chest had become legends of the high country. Though no pack on either side of the peaks knew their names, Rowan and Cassius. They had grown into giants. They stood taller than any warrior Barren remembered from the old halls, broad and powerful, moving through the snow with a silence that made even the wind seem clumsy. They were mirror opposites in every way but the eyes. Rowan, the elder by a handful of minutes, wore his mother's dark hair and her watchful, calculating mind. He struck like a shadow, quiet and certain, thinking 3 moves ahead, while his enemy was still deciding to fight. Cassius wore his father's silver fair mane and a temper like a banked fire, always one breath from blazing. In a clash, he was a storm given muscle and will, but both of them carried the silver eyes, and both of them, when they fought as a pair, wove their wills together into a single suffocating weight of dominance that no rogue in all the peaks dared stand against. Barren had made them this way. She had taught them the quiet, lethal art she remembered from her own bloodline, and folded into them the raw savagery the wild demands. She had taught them to track blind, to hunt without a whisper, to fight as one creature with 2 bodies. And through it all, one thing she had refused them: the name of their father. "You answer to no high seat," she would tell them, by the fire in the restored heart of the ruins. "Your loyalty is to each other, to this land, and to the truth, never to a crown built on a lie." She named him to them only as the one who had thrown her away. She never spoke the rest. She told herself she was protecting them. Perhaps she was protecting herself. Survival had taught her to bend her pride when it kept her sons fed. There was a man who lived at the lower edge of the deep woods, Thaddeus Ward, a trader in rare pelts and old curiosities, an outsider to the packs, eccentric and sharp-eyed and useful. He had stumbled into one of their snares years ago. Barren had chosen not to kill him. Instead, she had struck a bargain, the finest mountain pelts and the unseen protection of his caravans through the dangerous passes, in exchange for forged steel, healing supplies, and sturdy goods the wild could not provide. Ward kept his silence. He understood, in his trader's bones, that the wild wolves of the high country were the most valuable thing he had ever been lucky enough not to die meeting. It was a fragile thing, that arrangement, but it had held for years, and it would matter soon more than any of them yet knew. Far to the south, grief had made the leader of the pack reckless. Alaric Thorne no longer trusted his own halls. The mate at his side gave him nothing. The council he had once commanded now whispered behind his back about replacing him. His borders bled. His house was dying around him, the line he had thrown away his whole soul to secure guttering out like a spent candle. So he rode. He told them he was securing the frontier, hunting the rogue packs that had grown bold enough to slaughter outlying camps. The truth was simpler and worse. He was chasing the thread in his own chest. Some nights it swore to him that she still lived, out there in all that white. And he could not let himself believe it, because believing it meant she had been alive through every one of those cruel years, alive while he sat warm behind his walls and did nothing. So he told himself a kinder lie, that he was only looking for a grave, a place to kneel, a forgiveness he knew he had no right to ask. He was lying to himself, and somewhere underneath, he knew it. And the bond in his chest, that thread that had flared and settled all those years ago, pulled him north like a hand around his heart, season after season, deeper and deeper into country no sane wolf would enter, until, at last, it pulled him into a narrow gorge, walled in weeping ice, far too close to a fold of land he did not know held everything he had lost. The rogues came down from the cliffs without a sound. A dozen of them, massive, scarred, half mad with hunger and the long cruelty of the winter. They poured down into the narrowest throat of the gorge and trapped Alaric and the handful of guards who had followed him this far. The fight was instant and brutal. Alaric tore into the change mid-leap, his great silver wolf form colliding with the lead rogue, and for a moment the old strength was there. But the numbers were impossible. His guards fell one by one. He threw off 2 attackers, panting, his coat going dark with blood, and found himself wholly surrounded. The snapping jaws closed in, and for one strange floating instant, the leader of the pack felt something close to relief. Here then, this was the end he had earned. This was the wilderness he had condemned her to, coming at last to collect its debt. He braced himself for the final strike, and some buried part of him welcomed it. Then a roar split the gorge in two. It was not a sound of rage. It was a sound of absolute, unquestionable command. 2 voices braided into one, a dual weight of dominance so total that every rogue in the throat of the gorge froze where it stood. 2 shapes launched from the high ice, one black as a starless night, one radiant silver fair, both larger than Alaric's own great form. They did not bark. They did not snarl. They moved with a chilling, perfect silence. The black wolf struck first, flowing under a rogue's lunge with an evasion so fluid, so familiar, that something deep in Alaric's chest lurched with a recognition he could not place. The silver wolf met 3 of them head on, raw catastrophic strength scattering beasts twice the weight of a man like they were nothing but pups. In the space of a few breaths, it was over. The surviving rogues broke and fled up the cliffs in pure terror, and Alaric Thorn stood, shifting slowly back into the shape of a man, bleeding and forgotten in the red-stained snow, and stared at the 2 giants who had appeared from nowhere to save his life. The 2 wolves turned to face him, and as their eyes met his, the breath left his body. Staring back at him were 2 pairs of brilliant, liquid silver eyes. Eyes he had only ever seen in his own reflection, and in the long dead line that had carried that mark for generations. Impossible, his mind whispered. Only my blood carries that. The wolves blurred. Bone cracked and reshaped, and where the beasts had stood, Two young men rose, tall and broad and clad in expertly worked leathers. The dark one watched him with a cold, measuring stillness. The fair one glared with a burning, familiar arrogance. "Who are you?" Alaric breathed. His voice shook for the first time in 18 winters. "How do you carry those eyes?" The fair one stepped forward, fists clenching, ready to put the stranger down. "We answer to no one from the south," Cassius spat, and his voice was a deep echo of Alaric's own. "Cassius, hold." The dark one threw out an arm to stop his brother. Rowan's silver gaze moved over the royal crest worked into the metal of Alaric's discarded armor, and his eyes narrowed. "You wear the mark of the hold." "I lead it," Alaric said, staring at Cassius, at a face that was a mirror of his own youth. "Who are you? Who is your mother?" "They are mine." The voice cut through the freezing wind like a blade, and Alaric Thorne's heart simply stopped beating in his chest. That voice. He had heard it in his nightmares every single night for 18 winters. She stepped out of the falling snow, a heavy fur cloak about her shoulders, a forged bow gripped easy in one hand. She was changed, harder, older, crowned with a wild and terrible majesty that made the quiet girl he had once known seem like a half-remembered dream. But it was her. It was unmistakably her. "Barren," he choked, and fell to his knees in the bloody snow. The bond in his chest exploded into a blinding crescendo, and the tears froze on his face before they could fall. "You are alive," he whispered. "You are alive." She did not smile. She stood between her towering sons, her face carved from the same ice as the cliffs above, and she looked down at the broken thing kneeling before her. "Get up," she said. No reverence, no title. "You are trespassing in my territory." The truth was already settling into the sharp minds of her sons. Rowan looked from the kneeling stranger to his mother and back, and his voice dropped low and dangerous. "Mother," he said, "is this the one who threw you away?" Barren held Alaric's devastated gaze without flinching. "Yes," she answered. "This is the wolf who cast me into the winter to die." She sent him away. She let her sons drive the leader of the pack and his last surviving guards back toward the south with a warning that needed no words, and she told herself that was the end of it. That the past had said what it came to say, and now it could go back where it belonged. She was wrong about that too, because a full moon cycle later, on a night of cold spring rain, a broken figure dragged itself to the crumbling arches of the ruins. It was Garrick, the captain who had read her sentence in the snow so long ago. His armor was shattered, his face beaten, a festering wound torn through his side. Barren lowered her blade and rushed to him, and Rowan carried him into the fire while Cassius secured the dark beyond the walls. "Who did this?" she asked, pressing crushed herbs to the wound. Garrick gripped her wrist with trembling fingers. "Ambrose Crane," he gasped. When the leader came back from the mountains, he was a changed wolf. He moved to cast out Crane and his daughter, to undo the whole rotten bargain. But he was too late and too weak. Rowan's eyes sharpened. A coup. "They took him in his own chamber," Garrick wheezed. "He fought like something out of a story. There were too many. They have him chained in the deep cells. Crane is naming his daughter the ruler of it all. And he means to hand the whole territory to outsiders to keep his new power. Anyone still loyal to the old line is being put to the blade. His breath rattled. They are butchering our people, Barren. I barely escaped to find you. Silence fell over the ancient ruins. Only the fire spoke and the rain. And there, in the firelight, Barren Vale faced the hardest choice of her long, hard life. She owed them nothing. That was the cold truth of it. The pack had branded her empty. The council had cast her out. The wolf in the deep cells had signed her death with his own hand. Let it all burn. Let the cruelty they had built come down on their own heads. The high country had given her everything they had taken, and her sons owed that dying house not one drop of blood. That was justice of a kind, but it was not the only kind, because Garrick's words had named something her sons could not ignore. They are butchering our people, not the council, not Crane, the ordinary wolves, the mothers and the pups and the old ones who had only ever lived their small lives inside walls they did not build, and who were now being slaughtered for the crime of loyalty. Those wolves had done nothing. Those wolves were being cast off exactly as she had been cast off, by exactly the kind of men who measured a life only by its use to them. And Barren looked at her sons and saw their answer already burning in their faces. Not love for a father they had never known. Something cleaner than that. A pure and inherited outrage at cruelty itself. That is our blood being spilled in the South, Rowan said quietly. Those are innocents. It is not your pack, Barren reminded him gently. You were cast out, Mother, Cassius said, his fists white. We never were. We never got the chance to choose. We have one now. Barren was silent for a long moment. The fire snapped. The rain fell. The wounded captain watched her with desperate eyes, and the choice resolved itself, the way the truest choices do, into something simple. She would not ride south to save a king. She would never again bend a knee to that high seat or the man who held it. But she would not stand in the snow and let innocent wolves be erased the way the world had once tried to erase her. She would not let the cycle of throwing people away win one more time. Then we do not ride for a crown, Barren said, and a fierce and terrible smile touched her lips. We ride to break the ones who think they can decide who gets to live. The preparation took only days, but it changed everything. They called on Thaddeus Ward, who was horrified at the chaos tearing apart his trade and eager to help. He gave them fresh horses and a dozen hard, discreet, well-armed men. Garrick, mending, sent word ahead to Gideon Frost, the leader of a neighboring pack who had long chafed under Crane's grasping reach. Frost rallied the scattered loyalists and rode to meet them at the very border of the old territory. And when that gathered force first laid eyes on the twin giants striding at the front, tall and terrible, and bearing the unmistakable silver eyes of the true line, their morale broke open into something close to worship. The lost heirs had returned. The mother no one had ever known had survived was riding at their head, and the woman they had thrown into the snow to die was coming home. Not as a ghost, not as a beggar, but as a storm with two blades at her side. Barren rode at the front, silver-streaked hair streaming, her face set toward the south. She did not look afraid. She looked like a reckoning. The hold had not changed in 18 winters. That was the thing that struck Barren first, from the dark line of the trees. The walls still rose pale and proud against the night. The high windows still caught what little light there was. The arches still curved exactly as they had the morning she had walked beneath them in chains, while a smiling old man watched from a balcony, and a stranger wore her furs. 18 winters of suffering, of starving, of building a life out of fallen stone, and the place that had thrown her away had not so much as shifted a single rock. "It looks the same," she said softly. Her horse shifted beneath her. The cold pressed close. "It is not," said Rowan at her right. "No," she agreed. Her amber eyes did not leave the walls. "It is not, because this time the three of us are on the outside looking in, and this time we chose to come." She drew a slow breath. Then she gave the only order the night required. "Open it." Her sons did not answer with words. They answered with the change. Rowan and Cassius stepped down from their horses and shed their leathers, and 2 enormous shapes rose in their place, one black as the space between stars, one pale as the heart of winter. They did not charge the gate. They flowed toward the walls. Barren watched them cross the open killing ground faster than any sentry could track, 2 shadows pouring over the snow, and then up the sheer stone face itself, claws finding the old seams, bodies rising backward against gravity like smoke climbing the wrong way. They were over the top before a horn could sound. The men on the wall barely had time to turn. Those who stood and fought fell. Those who dropped their blades and ran were allowed to keep their lives, because Barren had said so before they ever rode. This was not a slaughter. She had been very clear. This was a door being opened. And then the great iron gates groaned and shuddered and swung wide from the inside. The loyalists came through them like a held breath finally released. Barren rode in at the center of them. She passed the courtyard where she had been stripped of her name. She did not turn her head to look at it. She had spent enough of her life looking back. She kept her eyes forward, on the heart of the hold, where the ones who had built their power on her ruin were waking to discover that the past had teeth. Ambrose Crane had bought his soldiers with gold, and gold, it turned out, was a poor thing to die for. The hired blades who held the inner halls had agreed to guard a comfortable new order. They had not agreed to stand against 2 giants whose joined dominance rolled ahead of them down the corridors like a physical weight. Every wolf in the hold felt it. That suffocating pressure. That deep animal certainty that something far stronger than them had entered the room, and that the only sane answer was the throat bared and the belly low. The mercenaries broke without a real fight. In one hall, a dozen of them simply set down their weapons and sank to their knees as the twins passed, their bodies surrendering to a truth their minds had not yet finished forming. The loyalists swept the lower halls, then the upper. Room by room, the stolen hold fell, and through the falling, Barren Vale walked. Slowly, deliberately, her boots ringing on the polished stone, her silver-streaked hair loose, her face calm as deep water. The wolves she passed went still and quiet. They did not know her name, but something old and certain in them recognized what walked among them. Not a soldier, not a conqueror, a debt, come at last to be paid in full. Far below, in the cold dark of the deep cells, Alaric Thorne heard it all. He heard the roar of the loyalists flooding the gates. He heard the heavy hush that spread wherever his sons walked. He heard the stolen order he had failed to stop come crashing down around the ears of the wolf who had stolen it. And in his chest, the bond he had dragged behind him like a chain for 18 winters flared so bright and so sudden that he cried out against his shackles. She was here, inside these walls, closer than she had been since the morning he had been too much a coward to watch her go. He pressed his bound hands flat against the freezing stone and let the feeling pour through him, and it broke open something that had been frozen shut for half his life. "Maren," he whispered, not a plea, the name of a thing he had finally, far too late, come to understand. Then he closed his eyes and listened to the storm he had spent 18 winters dreading arrive in full, and a strange calm settled over him. Whatever came down those stairs for him now, he had earned it. Every single step of it. The doors of the central hall were the last thing standing between Maren and the two who had spent her life like coin. Cassius reached them first. He did not pause. He drove his shoulder into them with the full weight of everything 18 winters in the cold had built, and they tore from their hinges and crashed inward. And Maren walked through the wreckage into the hall where her fate had been decided without her. It was almost exactly as she remembered. The high seat at the far end, the long cold tables, the dead hearth, the old banners hanging still in the windless air, and there, backed against the foot of the dais behind a thin, trembling line of guards, stood Ambrose Crane and his daughter Cordelia. The old man had aged. The careful smile that had ruled this hall for 18 winters was gone. His face had gone the color of cold ash. His eyes darted from the black wolf to the pale wolf in the broken doorway, then to the woman walking down the center of his stolen hall toward him. He did not know her. For one heartbeat, he did not know her. And then he did. Every drop of blood drained from his face. "Kill her," he hissed at the guards. "Kill them. Kill all of—" The guards did not move. They could not. The aura pouring off Rowan and Cassius had nailed every wolf in the hall to the floor of their own instincts. One by one the hired men folded, blades ringing on the stone, throats turned up to the ceiling. Ambrose Crane stood alone, with nothing left to hide behind but his terror. Maren stopped a dozen paces away. She did not reach for her bow. She did not lunge. She only stood and looked at him and let the silence grow heavy enough to crush. "You remember me," she said. Her voice was quiet. It filled the hall to the rafters anyway. Ambrose's mouth moved. Nothing came out of it. "You should," she went on. "You spent years building the thing that ended my life. The whispers in the courtyards. The pity dressed up as kindness. The careful words poured into careful ears. The healer who came to me with drafts to calm my nerves instead of help, because the decision had already been made. By you, long before anyone said it aloud." A low murmur moved through the loyalists at her back. "You wanted me gone," Maren said. "You wanted an empty place beside the leader of this pack, so your daughter could fill it, so your blood could sit at the high table, and your hand could move every wolf here like a piece on a board." Her amber gaze did not waver, and you reached for the oldest, easiest weapon there is. You told them that a mate who does not give the pack a pup has no worth. You told them a life is only worth what it produces. And do you know what the saddest part is, Ambrose? She stepped closer. The saddest part is that they believed you. This whole hall believed you. They stood in that courtyard and watched a living woman be cast into the snow to die. And they called it the law, because it is so much easier to call cruelty a law than to look at it and call it by its name. Ambrose found a thread of his voice at last. You were Barren, he spat, clutching the last weapon he had. You gave nothing. You gave the line. Turn around. She did not raise her voice. There was no need. Turn around, Ambrose, and tell this hall, one more time, what I gave the line. Slowly, as though his neck fought him, the old man turned. He looked at the two giants filling the broken doorway, at the raven hair and the silver fair hair, at the two pairs of brilliant, impossible, unmistakable silver eyes blazing out of two faces that not one soul in that hall could pretend not to know. The mark of the true bloodline, living, breathing, towering. The murmur became a roar. It rolled through the gathered wolves like a wave hitting a shore. First disbelief, then understanding, then something that was almost awe. The empty mate, the barren wife, the worthless woman they had cast out to die in the cold. She had carried the true heirs of the line in her own body, alone, and survived the worst the world had to give, and brought them home, grown into the most powerful wolves any of them had ever laid eyes on. The lie did not merely crack. It came apart at the root, and every wolf in that hall who had ever whispered against her, who had ever weighed her by the one thing her body had not given, felt the full shame of it land on their shoulders all at once. Ambrose Crane sank to his knees, not from the aura of the twins, from the unbearable weight of finally being seen for what he was. Mercy, he gasped, and the proud schemer was simply gone. Only a frightened old wolf left kneeling in his place. Mercy, I beg you. I only did what the pack. Stop. Her voice cut clean through his. She closed the last of the distance and stood over him. And Cassius came forward, his silver eyes burning, his whole body coiled and shaking with the need to end the old man where he knelt. Cassius, Marin said. He froze. He took your home, her son said, low and rough. He tried to take your life. He would have taken ours and never blinked. Let me finish it. No, she did not look away from Ambrose as she answered. If we open his throat here, on this floor, in front of all of them, she said, then we have only proven him right. We will have shown this whole pack that the strong throw away the weak whenever it suits them. That a life is worth only what the one holding the blade decides it is worth. Her voice dropped, hard and clear and final. That is his world. I did not survive 18 winters of cold to hand my sons a kingdom built out of it. She crouched, slow, until she was level with the kneeling man's eyes. You spent your whole life teaching people that worth is something you earn by being useful to someone stronger, she said. So here is what your worth has earned you. You will live. You will lose everything you took. And you will spend every day you have left watching the very wolves you taught to discard the weak choose over and over, never to do it again. She straightened. Take him down to the cells, she said. "Him and his daughter both. They will be judged in the open, in the light, by everyone. The way I never was." Rowan stepped forward and hauled the old man up by the collar as though he were made of straw, and dragged him down the dais steps into the waiting hands of the loyalists. Cordelia did not struggle. She had sunk to the cold floor in her fine stolen clothes, and as the guards drew her past, she lifted her eyes to Marin for a single breath. There was nothing left of triumph in her. "He chose all of it for me," Cordelia whispered. "The seat was never... I never wanted to take your..." "I know," Marin said, and for the first time, her voice was not carved from ice. "You were a weapon too. A different kind than I was, but a weapon all the same. He used you exactly the way he used everyone who came near him." She held the younger woman's wet gaze. "What you do with the rest of your life belongs to you now. Not to him. Not to me. To you." It was not forgiveness. It was something harder and rarer. The simple, deliberate refusal to pass the cruelty along. Cordelia was led away, weeping quietly, and the great hall went still. Marin turned at last to the pack. The hall was full now. Loyalists, citizens, the thin and frightened wolves who had been freed from the lower cells. Hundreds of faces, all turned up toward the woman standing in the place where their fate had once been decided without their consent. She looked at the high seat behind her. She did not climb it. 18 winters ago," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the stone. "This hall decided that a life is worth only what it can give. They decided I was empty. And because I was empty, I was nothing. And because I was nothing, I could be thrown into the snow." She let that truth stand naked in the air. "I did not come back to take that seat. I did not come back to put one cruelty where another used to sit. I came back to say one thing to every wolf in this hall, and to make certain none of you ever forgets it." Her amber eyes moved slowly across the crowd. "No one decides your worth for you. Not a council, not a leader, not a clever, frightened old man with a smooth voice and a long memory for other people's weaknesses. Your worth is not what you produce. It is not what you give them. It was never theirs to grant, and it is not theirs to take. It is yours. It was always, only yours." For one long breath, the hall held its silence. Then it broke, not into the cheering of soldiers, into something far older and far deeper. A great low howl rose from the gathered wolves, throats baring, heads bowing, the whole pack pouring out grief and shame and release all at once, acknowledging in that ancient sound the truth they had been too afraid to see 18 winters before. Rowan and Cassius came to stand at either side of their mother, and the woman who had once walked into a storm with nothing but a secret beneath her ribs now stood at the heart of the place that had cast her out, flanked by the living proof of everything they had been wrong about, and took back, fully and finally, the voice they had once tried to bury in the snow. When the howling faded, Garrick limped to her side. His face was grave. "There is one more thing, Marin," he said quietly. "Below, the deepest cell." She had not forgotten. She had only been waiting until the work that truly mattered was finished. "Take me to him," she said. And as she walked toward the dark stair that wound down beneath the hold, toward the wolf who had signed her death warrant and then spent 18 winters drowning in the regret of it, Marin felt the bond in her chest draw tight one last time. not with longing. That was finished now. It pulled tight with the steady, unshaken certainty of a woman who had, at long last, come to stand entirely on her own ground. Down in the dark, chained to the cold stone, Alaric Thorne lifted his head at the sound of her steps on the stair, and he was weeping before she ever reached the bars. The stair down to the deepest cell was old and worn and very dark. Barren took it slowly. There was no need to hurry now. The hold was hers, or near enough. The work that mattered had been done in the great hall above, before the eyes of the whole pack. What waited at the bottom of these steps was not a battle. It was something harder. It was a reckoning that no blade could finish. The torch in the iron bracket guttered as she reached the bottom, and in its low orange light, she saw him, Alaric Thorne, chained to the far wall of a damp stone room that smelled of rust and cold. He had been the most powerful creature she had ever known. The wolf whose voice could quiet a hall, whose aura could press a room of warriors to their knees, whose love had once made the very earth feel steady beneath her feet. There was almost nothing left of that wolf now. He was starved down to rope and bone. His silver hair hung lank across a face gone the gray of ash. Old bruises mottled his arms. His proud frame, the frame that had filled a doorway like a storm filling a sky, had folded in on itself in the dark. He lifted his head when her footsteps stopped, and he was already weeping. For Alaric, the sound of her step on the stair had been the cruelest mercy of his life. He had spent 18 winters chasing the ghost of that sound. He had ridden into country no sane wolf entered, season after season, telling his men he hunted rogues when what he truly hunted was a memory. He had wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to find some trace of her. A bone, a scrap of cloth. Anything he could carry home and bury and beg forgiveness over. He had never once let himself imagine this, that she would come down the stair alive, that she would come down it crowned in silver and wild majesty, with 2 sons at her back who could break him without trying, that she would stand in the torchlight and look at him not with hatred, which he could have borne, but with something far worse, a calm that had no need of him at all. Barren, he breathed. Only her name. It was all he had. He said it the way a drowning wolf says the name of the shore. She stood beyond his reach and looked at him for a long time. The bond pulled in her chest. She let it. She did not fight it the way she had in the early frozen years, clawing at it, hating the way it leaned her toward him. And she did not fall into it the way her younger heart once would have, either. She simply let it be what it was now. An old thread the moon had spun, frayed and burned and quiet, running between 2 souls who had walked very different roads out of the same long dark. "You have aged," she said at last. It was not cruel. It was not gentle. It was only true. And she had grown into a woman who said true things. "You have become..." His voice cracked apart. He gathered it and tried again. "You have become everything I could not see. Everything they swore you were not." His chains scraped the stone as he stretched his bound hands toward her. "Barren, before the moon, I swear, if I had known you carried our..." "No." She did not raise her voice. She had not needed to raise it in a long time. "Do not give me that speech," she said. The one where you tell me you would have spared me if only you had known there were heirs in my belly. Do not." He fell silent. "Because that," she said softly, "is the whole sickness. Right there in your mouth. You are still telling me my life would have been worth keeping if only my body had been giving you something you wanted." The torch hissed and spat between them. "That is the lie I rode 18 winters to break," she went on. "Not the small lie, not the one where they called me Barren, the big one underneath it, the one that says a soul is only worth saving when it is useful." She shook her head slowly. "If you had known about the boys, you would have kept me, and that would not have been love, Alaric. That would have been a better trade. That is all it ever would have been." Alaric Thorne lowered his head against his chains, and he wept, openly, brokenly, the way a creature weeps when something inside it finally gives way that should have given way long ago. Because she was right. For 18 winters, he had told himself the story of the accidental tragedy, the heir lost to ignorance, the future thrown away because no one had told him it existed, and not once in all that time, until this freezing moment, had he made himself look at the simpler and far more terrible truth. It had been wrong to cast her out, even if every word they said had been true, even if she had been exactly what they called her, even if she had given the pack nothing at all, not a pup, not a sword, not a single useful thing for the rest of her days. She had still been a whole and living soul. She had still been the one the moon had tied to his, and he had weighed her like grain in a lean year, and found the measure wanting, and cast her into the snow to die. That was the sin, not the lost heirs, her, only ever her. "You are right," he whispered into the dark. "Moon, help me. You were always right, and I was too small to see it." It was the first wholly true thing he had said to her in 18 winters, and something in Maren, some last knot she had not known she was still carrying, loosened at the sound of it. She unlocked his chains herself. She did not do it because she had forgiven him. She did it because leaving him to rot in the dark would have made her into the very thing she had ridden across the mountains to defeat, and she would not hand Ambrose Crane that victory from the cell down the corridor. The irons fell away, and Alaric pitched forward, his ruined body unable to hold itself, and she caught him, because there was no one else there to do it, and because some old reflex in her hands still remembered the shape of him, even after everything. He clung to her. He wept into her shoulder like a lost pup, and for one breath she let him, one hand resting flat against his thin and shaking back, the way you steady something that is about to fall. One breath. Then she set him upright on his own feet and stepped back and put the distance between them again, slowly, deliberately, the way you finally set down a weight you have decided you are done carrying up the mountain. "You are not the leader of this pack anymore," she said. "You understand that." "I understand," he said. "And you are not coming back to me." He looked at her, and whatever he found in her face closed the last small door of hope he had kept hidden in some buried corner of himself. "I know," he said quietly. "I knew it the moment you stepped out of the snow in the gorge. You stopped being mine somewhere out there in the cold." "No," she said, and for the first time something almost gentle touched the edge of her mouth. I was never yours to lose, Alaric. I was always my own. You simply could not see it. None of you could. She turned toward the stair. Come up into the light. There is something the whole pack needs to witness today, and so do your sons. The sons were waiting at the top of the stair. Rowan and Cassius stood shoulder to shoulder in the corridor, and when their father came up into the torchlight, leaning on their mother's strength, the two giants went very still. This was the wolf who had cast her into the winter. This was the betrayer they had been raised on, the cautionary tale told by the fire, the faceless cruelty that had shaped the whole geography of their childhood. And he was so much smaller than the story. Cassius stared at him with open contempt, his fists curling, the old fury rising fast and hot. But Rowan, the watchful one, only studied the broken wolf for a long, quiet moment, and what he said surprised them all. You look like us, Rowan said. It is strange to hate a stranger your whole life and then meet him and find your own face looking back. Alaric could not answer. He could only look at them, at the dark hair and the fair, at the silver eyes that were his and not his, at the two extraordinary lives he had played no part in shaping, and understand fully the scale of what he had lost. We are not yours, Cassius said low. She made us, alone, in the cold. You gave us nothing but the eyes. I know, Alaric said. I deserve nothing. I ask for nothing. And that, more than any plea, was what made Rowan's hard gaze soften by the smallest degree. We will see, Rowan said. In time, we will see what you become now, with nothing left to protect but the truth. It was not forgiveness. It was the door left unlatched. For these two, raised by a woman who had refused to pass on the cruelty done to her, it was more than the old wolf had any right to expect. The next morning broke clear and cold and unbearably bright. The whole pack gathered in the great courtyard, thousands of them, wolves from every fold and valley of the territory, drawn by the news that had spread through the night like fire across dry grass. The lost heirs had returned. The Barren mate had never been barren. The old order had fallen in a single night. They filled the courtyard and lined the walls and crowded every window, and they stared up at the high balcony where, 18 winters before, a smiling old man had looked down upon a woman in chains. A different scene stood upon it now. Alaric Thorn, fragile and hollow, leaning on a carved staff because his beaten body could not yet stand without one. Rowan and Cassius, towering and solemn at his sides. And a few paces behind them all, neither above the pack nor beside the leader, stood Marin. She had refused the place of honor. She had chosen, with great care, to stand exactly where she wished to stand, which was nowhere any of them could assign to her. Alaric raised one hand, and the court shamans lent their old craft to his voice, so it would carry to the farthest wolf in the crowd. I have failed you, he said. A murmur rolled through the thousands. I let fear rule me, he went on, and though his body trembled, his voice did not. I let ambition rot the foundation of this house.